Good day everyone. In this presentation, I will tackle some articles and sections in Chapter 6, 7, and 8 of the Philippine Electrical Code Part 1. Starting with Chapter 6, which is special equipment. So articles in Chapter 6 can be grouped thematically, so there would be 7 groups. For Group 1, prefab systems. This include electric signs and outline lighting, manufactured wiring systems, and office furnishings. For Group 2, lifting systems. This include cranes and hoists, elevators and dumbwaiters, escalators, moving walks, and etc. For Group 3, vehicle supports. This include electrical vehicles and trackways if electrified. For Group 4, data support, this includes IT equipment, modular data centers, and sensitive electronic equipment. For Group 5, industrial, this includes electrolytic cells, electroplating, industrial machinery. For Group 6, water, this includes irrigation machines, pools and spas, tubs, fountains, etc., and bodies of water. For Group 7, alternative energy, this includes solar photovoltaic systems, fuel cells, and wind systems. However, the following belong to no group: electric welders, audio equipment, pipe organs, X-ray equipment, induction and dielectric equipment, integrated electrical systems, and fire pumps. There are lots of topics under Chapter 6, but I will be focusing on Article 6.0, Electric Signs and Outline Lighting. So under Electric Signs and Outline Lighting, we will discuss listing and markings for electric signs and outline lighting, branch circuits, disconnects, grounding and bonding, location, ballast transformers, and power supplies. Article 6.0, Electric Signs and Outline Lighting. This article covers the installation of conductors, equipment, and field wiring for electric signs, retrofit kits, and outline lighting, regardless of voltage. All installations and equipment using neon tubing, such as signs, decorative elements, scaffold tubing, or art forms are covered by this article. So ano nga ba yung electric signs and outline lighting? So as per Chapter 1, electric sign is defined as any fixed, stationary, or portable self-contained electrically illuminated utilization equipment with words or symbols designed to convey information or attract attention. Whereas yung outline lighting is an arrangement of incandescent lamps or electric discharge lighting or other electrically powered light sources to outline or call attention to certain features such as the shape of the building or the decoration of a window. So these systems can include many lamp types such as LED, HID, and fluorescent. So these are sample features of electric signs and outline lighting. So this one is a neon sign, which is an electric sign lighted by long luminous gas discharge tubes that contains rarefied neon or other gases. So this is called a photovoltaic or PV powered sign, which is powered by solar energy. So for the listings and markings, all electric signs, section signs, and outline lighting must be listed and they must be installed per the listing instructions. Two types of lighting are exempted from the listing requirement if field installed. So the skeleton tubing and the outline lighting if wired according to Chapter 3. Signs and outline lighting system shall be listed and marked with the manufacturer's name, trademark, or other means of identification, and input voltage and current rating. So example dito, sa marking na to, is indicated yung current rating and the input voltage as well as the manufacturer's name, which is yung Southwest Neon San Antonio. So these markings don't have to be visible after installation, Pero dapat visible ito during maintenance or repair works. If located naman siya in wet location, the markings must be weatherproof. And products that don't comply with the marking requirements are possible counterfeit or fake. So, dapat hindi natin i-install yung mga counterfeit products because pwede siyang maging cause ng accidents or fires. So, branch circuits provide a sign outlet at the entrance of each tenant space in a commercial building or occupancy accessible to pedestrians. Supply each outlet with an individual branch circuit rated at least 20 amperes. So, first thing na manonotice natin kapag pupunta tayong strip malls and other commercial buildings is merong signs every store. So, naglalagay ng signs for several reasons, including the fact that every commercial occupancy needs a form of identification, and the standard method is the electric sign. So, in section 6.0.1.5 of PEC, requires a sign outlet for the entrance of each tenant location that is accessible to pedestrian. So, katulad ng nasa figure, so, kada tenant space is merong sign outlet na located sa entrance. Also, take note that branch circuits that supply signs are continuous loads. Ibig sabihin, nag-ooperate siya continuously within 3 hours or more. So, dapat mag-a-apply tayo ng 125% rule kapag magagawa tayo ng load calculations. For the rating naman, branch circuits that supply neon tubing insulation must be rated 30 ampere or less. Other signs and outline lighting systems must not be rated more than 20 amperes. So, for neon tubing, 30 amperes or less, and for the other signs is 20 amperes. So, take note of that. For disconnects, each circuit for a sign outline lighting system or skeleton tubing must be controlled by an externally operable switch or circuit breaker that operates all ungrounded conductors. The disconnecting means must be within sight of the sign or outline lighting system. So, ibig sabihin, dapat yung disconnecting means tulad ng circuit breaker or fuse switch ng sign or outline lighting system is dapat within the line of sight or nakikita. So, visible and not more than 50 feet distant from each other. If any section of the sign or outline lighting isn't within sight of the disconnect but can be energized, you must ensure that the disconnect can be locked in the open position. So, kapag naman hindi siya visible or hindi siya within the line of sight, so dapat nakalock siya. For safety, for safety purposes at ma-ensure na qualified person lang yung mag-ooperate nun kung nakalock siya. So, what if signs or outline lighting systems are operated by external controllers? The answer is, install the disconnect within sign of or in the same enclosure with the controller and ensure the disconnect is capable of, first, disconnecting the sign or outline lighting and the controller from all ungrounded supply conductors. And being locked in the open position, the provision for locking or adding a lock to this disconnect must be on the switch or circuit breaker. It must remain in place whether the lock is installed or not. So, ito. So, if nakikita nyo sa figure, yung disconnect located within sign of the controller must be capable of being locked in the open position. And ito yung sample lock niya. Next, grounding and bonding. Bond the metal parts of signs and outline lighting systems to the transformer or power supply equipment grounding conductor of the branch circuit or feeder supplying the sign or outline lighting system. Bonding conductor shall be copper not smaller than 2.0 mm squared or 1.6 mm dia. If you install bonding conductors outside of a sign or raceway, protect them from physical damage. The earth must not be used as the effective ground fault current path required by 250.4A4 and 250.4A5 of the National Electrical Code. So, bakit nga ba di pwedeng gamitin yung earth as an effective ground fault current path? So, the reason for that is because the contact resistance of your grounding electrode to the earth is high, and very little ground fault current returns to the electrical supply source via the earth. So, the result, the circuit of your current device won't open and clear a ground fault. Therefore, metal parts will remain energized with dangerous voltage. So, as the figure shows, so yun, na yung lalaki is na-ground siya. Location. Unless mechanically protected from physical damage, a sign or outline lighting system must be at least 4,300 mm above areas accessible to vehicles. Section 2.25.1.18 requires a minimum of 5,500 mm overhead conductor clearance above public streets, alleys, roads, parking areas subject to truck traffic, and driveways on other than residential property. Install signs and outline lighting system so that adjacent combustible materials aren't subjected to temperatures that exceed 90 degrees Celsius. An incandescent or HID lamp or lamp holder must have at least 50 mm of spacing from wood or other combustible materials. Signs and outline lighting systems installed at wet locations must be weatherproof and have drain hose. So, the provision for drain hose is that it should not be larger than 13 mm and not be smaller than 6 mm. And dapat located siya away from obstructions. For ballast transformers and power supplies. Ballast transformers and electronic power supplies must be accessible and securely fastened in place. The secondary conductors must be as short as possible. Provide a working space of at least 900 mm high by 900 mm wide by 900 mm deep for each ballast, transformer, and electronic power supply, unless installed in a sign. Ballast transformers and electronic power supplies are permitted to be installed in attics and soffits. If there's an access door and a passage at least 900 mm high by 600 mm wide with a suitable permanent walkway at least 1 feet wide to the point of entry for each component. So, dito sa picture is makikita na ang violation is yung power supplies per sign is o yung equipment is connected by a flexible cord. So, violation yun. Kasi, ballast transformers and electronic power supply for signs can be located above a suspended ceiling, but the equipment can be connected by a flexible cord. So, because yung flexible cord is not allowed to be installed through or above a suspended ceiling, as per chapter 4. So, nandun yung provision for the flexible cord or requirements for the flexible cord. That's all for chapter 6. Now, let's move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 7, special conditions. Our topic for chapter 7 will only focus on various special power systems, specifically the emergency systems, legally required standby systems, optional standby systems, and critical operations power systems. Article 7.0 Emergency Systems. These systems are intended to automatically supply illumination, power, or both to designated areas and equipment in the event of failure of the normal supply or in the event of accidental elements of a system intended to supply, distribute, and control power and illumination essential for safety to human life. So, if the backup power systems are legally required and it's essential for safety to human life, so these systems are classified as emergency systems. This system is at the top of the hierarchy of backup power systems in terms of their level of importance. Basically, their level of importance corresponds to the order in which they appear in the PEC. So this is the single line diagram for emergency systems. Moreover, emergency power systems are those systems legally required and classed as emergency by a governmental agency having jurisdiction. These systems are intended to automatically supply illumination and or power essential for safety to human life. So, nabanggit dito na legally required. So, ano ba yun? A system is legally required when any governmental agency having jurisdiction says it is. The rules that dictate what kinds of emergency loads are legally required are found in the locally adopted building code, such as the International Building Code or NFPA 101 Life Safety Code. So in short, emergency systems are lifelines for people, and the Article 7.0 is based on keeping those lifelines from breaking. Places of assembly where emergency systems are generally installed: hotels, theaters, sports arenas, healthcare facilities, and similar institutions. So emergency systems are generally installed in places of assembly or places subjected to occupancy by a large number of persons na kailangan ng artificial illumination para sa safe exiting and for panic control sa buildings in case na magkaroon ng power loss or emergency. So here are some terms found in Article 7.0. First is branch circuit emergency lighting transfer switch, a device connected on the load side of a branch circuit over current protective device that transfers only emergency lighting loads from the normal supply to an emergency supply. So ito po yung itsura niya. Next, luminaire directly controlled, an emergency luminaire that has a control input for an integral dimming or switching function that drives the luminaire to full illumination upon loss of normal power. So, kadalasan nating makikita to sa mga hallways, like hallways ng hospitals, schools, or other buildings or occupancies na na-occupy ng madaming tao. So, kapag nagkaroon ng power loss or interruption is mag-i-illuminate siya as soon as mawala ng power. Next is Relay Automatic Load Control or ALCR, a device used to set normally dim or normally off switch emergency lighting equipment to full power illumination levels in the event of a loss of the normal supply by bypassing the dimming or switching controls and to return the emergency lighting equipment to normal status when the device senses the normal supply has been restored. So, the ALCR ensures a light-on state during loss of normal power while tracking the state of normal lighting loads during normal operation. So, ito yung itsura niya. Receptacles supplied from the emergency system shall have a distinctive color or marking on the receptacle cover plates or the receptacles. So, contained in Section 7.0.2.1, Wiring Emergency System. So, ito yung example nung paglalagay ng marking. So, ang tanong is, do emergency receptacles have to be red? So, nabanggit nga dito sa code na shall have a distinctive color. So, hindi specifically binanggit kung what color. Pero, usually, ang ginagamit or ina-adapt is yung color red to identify that this system or receptacle is for emergency circuit. So, next, load shedding. The emergency system must be able to supply or emergency loads simultaneously if an alternate power supply has adequate capacity. It may supply emergency loads, legally required standby, and optional standby system loads When the emergency supply also supplies power for non-emergency loads, the emergency loads take priority. So in simple word, load shedding is an act or process ng pag-disconnect ng electric current sa certain lines kapag yung demand is mas mataas kaysa dun sa supply. So kapag nagkaroon ng kukulangan sa alternate power supply, syempre ang i-disconnect is yung mga non-emergency loads at ang ipa-priority is yung mga emergency loads. So dito, nabanggit na to kanina yung sa level of importance niya. So proceed na tayo. Next, a temporary alternate source of power must be available whenever the emergency generator is out of service for more than a few hours for maintenance or repair. So kapag under maintenance or repair ang emergency generator na nagsusupply sa emergency loads, is dapat merong standby alternate source. Next is transfer equipment. Transfer equipment shall be designed and installed to prevent the inadvertent interconnection of normal and emergency sources of supply in any operation of the transfer equipment. Automatic transfer switches must be electrically operated, mechanically held, and listed for emergency system use. So, ang transfer switch is an electrical device that is used to switch load between two sources. So, kapag nagkaroon ng power interruption, is automatically mag-switch siya from normal supply to emergency supply. Ito po yung diagram for emergency system transfer switch. As you can see po, parehong yung single generator supply ay nagsiserve sa other loads and emergency loads. So, ang pinagkaiba is yung sa left side ay gumamit ng multiple transfer switch for emergency loads and for the other loads. Yung sa kabila naman is isang transfer switch lang, yung para sa normal and emergency load. So, clear violation po yun. Because according po sa code, multiple transfer switches are required where a single generator is used to supply both emergency loads and the other loads. For these signs, emergency sources, a sign must be placed at the service entrance equipment indicating the type and location of on-site emergency power sources. So, kagaya po nung nasa picture is merong siyang sign na nakalagay din sa service entrance equipment. For identification of wiring, boxes, and enclosures including transfer switches, generators, and power panels for emergency circuits must be permanently marked as components of an emergency power system. Identification may be by color code, sign, or other permanent form of identification. Colored raceways and fittings are permitted but not required. All boxes and enclosures containing emergency circuits must be permanently marked so they'll be readily identifiable as a part of the emergency circuit or system. So dito, color code and sign yung means of identification na these boxes and enclosures contain emergency circuits. To ensure that a fault on the normal wiring circuits won't affect the performance of emergency wiring or equipment, keep all wiring to emergency loads independent of all other wiring. Wiring from the normal power source is permitted to be located in transfer equipment enclosures. Sources of power general requirements. Current supply shall be such that in the event of failure of the normal supply to or within the building or group of buildings concerned, emergency lighting, emergency power, or both shall be available within the time required for the application but not to exceed 10 seconds. So, sources of power includes storage battery, generator set, uninterruptible power supplies, separate service, connection ahead of service disconnecting means, use cell system, and unit equipment. For storage batteries must be of suitable rating and capacity to supply and maintain the total load for 1.5 hours without a voltage applied to the load falling below 87.5% of normal. Also, automotive type batteries shall not be used. For the generator set, a generator set can be any of several configurations. Prime mover driven, able to automatically start the prime mover when the normal service fails. Internal combustion engines as the prime mover provide an on-site fuel supply size for at least 2 hours of full demand operation. Outer generator, if an outer generator has a readily accessible disconnecting means within sight of the structure, you don't need an additional disconnecting means on or at the structure. For the generator feeder conductors that serve or pass through the structure, you don't need, so ito exception. You don't need to locate the generator disconnecting means within sight of the structure served if you satisfy these two requirements. Number 1, conditions of maintenance and supervision ensures that only qualified persons will monitor and service the installation. For number 2, documented safe switching procedures are established and maintained for this connection. So next, for the uninterruptible power supplies, an app serving as the emergency power source must comply with the applicable requirements for batteries and generators. An additional service installed per Article 2.3 can serve as an emergency source of power, but only if it is acceptable to authorities having jurisdiction. So to minimize the possibility of simultaneous interruption of the supply, a separate service drop or lateral must be electrically and physically separated from all other service conductors. Fuel cell systems, used as a source of power for emergency system, shall be of suitable rating and capacity to supply and maintain the total load for not less than 2 hours of full demand operation. For the individual unit equipment, IUE, the National Electrical Code means an emergency lighting battery pack. These are traditionally shaped much like a lunch pack and thus are sometimes called lunch boxes in the field. Individual unit equipment for emergency illumination shall consist of the following: a rechargeable battery, a battery charging means, provision for one or more lamps mounted on the equipment or shall be permitted to have terminals for remote lamps or both, a relaying device arranged to energize the lamps automatically upon failure of the supply to the unit equipment. So lamps can be mounted on or located remote from the equipment. An emergency light with means of recharge to recharge the battery. The battery-powered emergency light must contain a relay device to automatically energize the lamp when there's a power failure to the unit. So requirement, twist lock not required. Maximum 3 feet cord. So the branch circuit that supplies unit equipment battery pack must be the same branch circuit that supplies the normal lighting in the area, but the unit equipment must be connected ahead of any local switches. So ito yung 2 reasons kung bakit yung emergency lighting battery packs is dapat connected ahead of the switch controlling the normal area lighting. So first, in the event of a power loss to the lighting circuit, the emergency battery lighting packs will activate and provide emergency lighting for people to exit the building. And 2, the emergency lighting battery packs won't turn on when the switch controlling normal lighting is turned off. Caution! Individual unit equipment must not be connected to the emergency circuit because it won't operate when normal power is lost since the equipment is being supplied by the emergency power system. Next article, Article 7.1, Legally Required Standby Systems. Those systems required in so class as legally required standby by municipal, state, federal, or other codes or by any governmental agency having jurisdiction. These systems are intended to automatically supply power to selected loads other than those classed as emergency systems. in the event of failure of the normal source. So in other words, legally required standby systems are required by codes to illuminate or to power equipment that is not categorized as requiring emergency power, but whose failure could create hazards, hinder rescue, or hamper firefighting operations. So these systems are known as Level 2 or less critical systems. Legally required standby systems are typically installed to serve loads for heating and refrigeration systems, communication systems, ventilation and smoke removal systems, sewage disposal, lighting systems, and industrial processes. So the provision for transfer equipment and signs for legally required standby system is the same with the emergency system. So let's proceed to the next slide. So sources of power. General requirements. Current supply shall be such that in the event of failure of the normal supply to or within the building or group of buildings concerned, legally required standby power will be available within the time required for the application but not to exceed 60 seconds. So in short, legally required standby system must supply standby power in 60 seconds or less after a power loss instead of the 10 seconds or less required for emergency systems. So yung types ng sources of power for legally required standby system is pareho lang nung sa emergency systems. Legally required standby system generator, premises fuel, where internal combustion engines are used as the prime mover, and on-site fuel supply must be provided for at least 2 hours of full demand operation of the system. Next, legally required standby generator disconnect. A disconnect isn't required on or at the building or structure reserved if the outdoor generator has a readily accessible disconnect that's within sight of the building. So next, legally required standby power separate service. An additional service where approved by the authorities having jurisdiction is permitted to serve as an emergency power source. Legally required standby systems connection ahead of service. A legally required standby system can be connected ahead of but not within the service disconnect enclosure. So the reason for that is, number 1, in the event of power loss to the lighting circuit, the emergency battery lighting packs will activate and provide emergency lighting for people to exit the building. And 2, the emergency lighting battery packs won't turn on when the switch controlling normal lighting is turned off. Next, Article 7.2 Optional Standby Systems. Those systems intended to supply power to public or private facilities or property where life safety does not depend on the performance of the system. These systems are intended to supply on-site generated power to selected loads either automatically or manually. So taking third priority after emergency and legally required systems, optional standby systems protect public or private facilities or property where life safety doesn't depend on the performance of the system. So these systems aren't required for the rescue operations. So this article also applies to the installation of optional standby generators in homes, farm estates, small businesses, and many other applications where standby power isn't legally required. So, exception, a portable generator that provides temporary power like those used on construction sites doesn't fall within the scope of Article 7.2 unless the generator is permanently connected to the premises wiring. For the transfer equipment, the transfer switch is required for all fixed or portable optional standby systems. Exception, temporary connection of a portable generator without transfer equipment is permitted where written safety procedures are placed and conditions of maintenance and supervision ensure that only qualified persons will service the installation and when the normal supply is physically isolated by a lockable disconnecting means or by the disconnection of the normal supply conductors. So applicable to both legally required and optional standby systems. First, there must be a transfer switch so that The service and alternate source of power cannot operate simultaneously. This protects electricians and linemen from electric shock hazards. Signage is required to identify the alternate source of power for the premises wiring. This protects emergency responders who might otherwise think the power to the building is turned off. Both types of systems must have adequate capacity to power the intended loads. The secondary power source can be a battery, generator, or other alternative source. Proper grounding and/or bonding must be provided, and unlike emergency systems, the wiring is permitted to occupy the same raceways, cables, boxes, and cabinets as the general wiring. So legally required standby systems only. So these are requirements for legally required standby systems. Once the system is installed, the authorities having jurisdiction must conduct or witness a test of the system. Next, periodic testing is required and a written maintenance log must be kept. The transfer equipment must be automatic as well as listed and marked for emergency or legally required standby system usage. The system must provide power within 60 seconds of disruption of the normal power supply. Where the system is powered by an internal combustion engine, there must be a minimum of 2 hours worth of fuel supply at full demand on the premises. And last, the systems can be connected ahead of the service if approved by the AHT. So last article, Article 7.8, Critical Operations Power Systems or COPS. Critical Operations Power Systems are those systems so classed by municipal, state, federal, or other posts by any governmental agency having jurisdiction or by facility engineering documentation establishing a necessity for such a system. These systems include but are not limited to power systems, high voltage AC, fire alarm, security, communications, and signaling for designated critical operations areas. So it was developed in response to natural disasters and man-made hazards. Critical operations power systems are generally installed in vital infrastructure facilities that, if destroyed or incapacitated, would disrupt national security, the economy, public health or safety, and where enhanced electrical infrastructure for continuity of operation has been deemed necessary by governmental authority. So facilities that can be classified as designated critical operations areas are the following: police station, fire stations, emergency operations centers, various federal agency headquarters, federal data centers, and large airport air traffic control towers. So that's all for Chapter 7. For Chapter 8 naman po, is i-discuss ko po yung some requirements sa Article 8.0, which is communication circuits, and mga sample illustrations na compliant and non-compliant po sa article na ito. Article 8.0, Communication Circuits. This article covers communication circuits and equipment that extend voice, audio, video, interactive services, and outside wiring for fire alarms and vulgar alarms from the communications utility to the customer's communications equipment. So according po sa Section 8.0.1.24, Mechanical Execution of Work, communication circuits and equipment shall be installed in a neat and workmanlike manner. Cables installed exposed on the surface of ceilings and sidewalls shall be supported by the building structure in such a manner that the cable will not be damaged by normal building use, and such cables shall be secured by hardware including straps, staples, cable ties, hangers, or similar fittings designed and installed so as not to damage the cable. So makikita po natin sa illustration na ito na na-meet niya yung mga requirements ng Section 8.0.1.24. So yung mga communication cable po ay naka-install in a neat and workmanlike manner sa surface ng ceilings and sa sidewalls, at nakasecure po sila gamit ang straps, staples, cable ties, and hangers. Next section naman po is section 8.0.1.25, abandoned cables. Abandoned cable po is a cable that isn't terminated to equipment or is not identified for future use with a tag. So ito po yung mga cables na hindi na kailangan o hindi na ginagamit and are just left in place. So according po dito, the accessible portion of abandoned communications cable shall be removed. So kailangan po siyang tanggalin para po ma-reduce yung risk ng electrical fire. And in addition po, yung mga abandoned cables naman na hindi located sa accessible location po, tulad ng mga naka-install po sa concealed raceways, ay hindi required na alisin. So, furthermore, where cables are identified for future use with a tag, the tag shall be of sufficient durability to withstand the environment involved. So, tulad po nitong nasa illustration is meron po siyang tag. Next naman po is section 8.0.1.26, spread of fire or products of combustion. So, as you can see po dito sa illustration, yung communication cables po ay nag-penetrate or dumaan through fire-rated walls. At hindi lahat po ng openings ay nakasil or may fire stop. So, it is a violation po sa section 8.0.1.26. So, according po dun sa code, yung openings po ng or kung saan dadaan po yung communication cables, communication raceways, and cable routing assemblies through fire-resistant rated walls ay dapat nakasil or meron dapat fire stop. Next section naman po is section 8.0.2.5, unlisted cables entering buildings. Unlisted communication cable is permitted in building spaces other than risers, ducts, or plenums if the length of the cable within the building from its point of entrance doesn't exceed 50 feet and the cable terminates in an enclosure or on a primary protector. So, unlisted cables are used by utilities and others for cable outside, as the enlisted cable has not been evaluated for smoke and flame spread. Pero, kagaya po ng sabi dito, permitted naman siyang gamitin in building spaces kapag yung length niya ay less than 50 feet and naka-terminate sa enclosure or primary protector. Next po is section 8.0.2.10, lightning conductors. Where practicable, a separation of at least 1,800 mm shall be maintained between communications wires and cables on buildings and lightning conductors. So, kagaya po ng nasa illustration is dapat po ma-maintain yung at least 1,800 mm or 6 feet na distance or separation ng communication wires and cables at lightning conductors. So, yung lightning conductors po pala ay isang metal rod na nakamount sa structure para protektahan po yung structure in case po ng lightning strike. Next naman po is section 8.0.3.4, grounding or interruption of metallic sheet members of communications cables. Entering buildings, in installations where the communications cable enters a building, the metallic sheet members of the cable can be grounded or interrupted by an insulating joint or equivalent device as close as practicable to the point of entrance. Section 8.0.4.1, Cable and Primary Protector Bonding and Grounding. The primary protector and the metallic member of cable sheets must be bonded or grounded in accordance with A through D. So, ang i-discuss lang po natin is yung A, which is yung bonding conductor or grounding electrode conductor. So, for the insulation, listed and be insulated, covered or bare. For the material, copper or other corrosion-resistant conductive material, stranded or solid. For the size, not be smaller than 2.0 mm squared with a current carrying capacity of not less than the grounded metallic sheet member or protected conductor of the communications cable, but not required to be larger than 14 mm squared. For the length, as short as practicable, and for 1 and 2 family dwellings, the bonding conductor or grounding electrode conductor must not exceed 6,000 mm in length. So, the reason po kung bakit nililimitahan po yung length ng bonding conductor or grounding electrode conductor ay para malimitahan din po yung induced potential or voltage differences between the building's power and communication systems during lightning events. So, next, run in straight line. Run in a straight line as practicable. So, ang reason po for this is because lightning doesn't like to travel around corners or through loops, which is why the grounding electrode conductor or bonding jumper must be run as straight as practicable. And for physical protection, the bonding conductor and grounding electrode conductor must not be subjected to physical damage if installed in a metal raceway. Both ends of the raceway must be bonded to the contained conductor or connected to the same terminal or electrode to which the bonding conductor or grounding electrode conductor is connected. So, yung pag-install po ng ating bonding conductor or grounding electrode conductor sa PVC conduit po is a better practice. Next naman po is section 8.0.5.1, raceways and cable routing assemblies for communications wires and cables. So for the types of raceways recognized in chapter 3, communications wires and cables shall be permitted to be installed in any raceway included in chapter 3. The raceway shall be installed in accordance with the requirements of chapter 2. So next po is communications raceways. Communication raceways po is an enclosed channel of non-metallic materials designed for holding communications wires and cables in plenum, riser, and general purpose applications. So where communications cables are installed in a listed communications non-metallic raceway, the raceways must be installed in accordance with 3.62.2.15 through 3.62.2.47. So in other words po, listed communications raceways must be installed according to the following rules for electrical non-metallic tubing. So next naman po is section 8.0.5.4, installation of communications wires, cables, and raceways and cable routing assemblies. Support of communications cables. Communications cables aren't permitted to be strapped, tapped, or attached to the exterior of any raceway as a means of support. So yung nasa illustration po is a clear violation sa section po since yung raceway ay ginawang means of support para sa communication cable. So, exception po for overhead area span of communication cables. So, area spans of communications cable can be attached to the exterior of a raceway mast, but not in the service mast. Key points to remember. First, don't attach incoming communications cables to the service entrance mast. Second, it's critical to determine the point of entrance for these circuits. Third, ground the primary protector as close as practicable to the point of entrance. Fourth, keep the grounding electrode conductor for the primary protector as straight and as short as possible. Fifth, if you locate communications cables above a suspended ceiling, route and support them to allow access via ceiling panel removal. 6. Keep these cables separated from lightning protection circuits. 7. If you install communications cables in a Chapter 3 raceway, you must do so in conformance with the PEC requirements for the raceway system. And last, space labeling and marking provisions apply, follow them carefully. So that's the end of my report po. Thank you.